Welcome to another episode of the Empowered Half Hour. I am so excited to share today's guest with you, Scott Maderer. We met in podcasting world. One of my, yeah, that's how it happened.
It's the alternate world, podcasting world.
Podcasting world. So my PR team had reached out to him to get me on a show. He said yes. We did the interview and we had just really good rapport. And I was like, you know what? You make a really excellent guest on my podcast. So I extended the invite. And Scott, now you're here. Welcome.
Thanks so much. I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to talk to your listeners today.
Yes. So let's go ahead. I always like to read the official bio so people know you a little more better. So let's get into it and then we'll start. In 2011, Scott and his wife, Carrie, took Inspired Stewardship as a business to serve Christian men and couples that are struggling to live out their calling. They work to help align the way you use your time, your talent, and your treasures so that you can identify and live a fully authentic life that allows you to authentically live your calling, serve others, and provide for your family. And I just have to pause to say, like, in our interview, I could feel all that passion come through, which is like, wow, I was like, come over here. As certified human behavior senior consultants and members of the John Maxwell team, they focus on helping you understand yourself, understand others, and through that understanding, build the kingdom. In 2017, they took the business full-time, offering assistance through one-on-one coaching, speaking, and workshops. Scott, you are a busy man. Welcome to the show.
Thanks so much. It's always funny listening to your own bio. You always critique it in your head. You're like, well, I should probably change that. Maybe, it's like, we should reword that.
Yeah. I might be
You
a
don't think
little
about it
uplift
until
back
you
here.
hear it, and then you're like,
I know, it is really funny hearing your own. I hear mine all the time. I'm like, do I need to rewrite that? So I'm really happy to have you here. And I really was inspired just when I met you the first time, so like some of the work that you're doing. And I'm really curious. I'd like to share with the listeners, like, how did you get here? What's the backstory to the Scott that you are today and your mission and the service that you're providing others?
I always like to start, I was born in a log cabin in Kentucky. Wait, no, that's Abraham Lincoln.
No, not that far back. Not that far back.
Not that far back. Honestly, I think like a lot of folks, we didn't necessarily sit down with this real in-depth plan of this is where we want to be in 20 years. This is where I want to run my own coaching business someday or anything like that. And yet at the same time, my mom's comment is, you've been a coach since you were 8. You just didn't call it that. So there is that sort of callback to, even as a kid, I was always the kid that was tutoring other kids. I was always the kid that was engaged in other kinds of things. I was always the one that everyone else came to for advice and that kind of thing. So there's definitely been echoes of it all the way back to, quote unquote, the log cabin in Kentucky kind of moment. But we'll start a little more recent than that. So we started actually with financial stuff because we had our own financial kind of horror story, like so many people do, of dealing with a lot of debt. At that time, I was a school teacher. I was a science teacher for about 16 years.
Okay.
And during that time, school teachers don't get paid a lot. I know, shocking, big surprise. But we had racked up a lot of debt. We were building a house. We were doing all of these other things. And I actually got to the point of being suicidal because of the debt situation myself, and attempted to take my life a couple of times, thought about it, others. And finally, we kind of had a breakthrough moment and came together and said, we've got to do something different. We've got to change this. And so we started doing things different, like actually talking to each other and working together, and strange little concepts like that married people should probably do naturally, but so many of us don't. And out of that, what happened is people started asking, wait, how did you do that? Could you help us? And so we started doing coaching of others in that realm. And then it began to kind of grow from there, because what we started noticing is a lot of times if people were struggling over here in the money area, they were also struggling over here in the time and productivity area. And by then I was in senior management and corporate. I ran a big team. I was flying all over the country. So time management was something that I was really studying and getting good at. And so we started adding that component. And then eventually I figured out, wait a minute, it's really not time and money anyway, it's us. And what I mean by that is, the way you handle your time, the way you handle your money is really about how you handle yourself. It's about how you communicate. It's about having a deeper understanding of your motivations, your why, what connects you to the world. What do you really want to do? What do you feel like you can't do and money or time is keeping you from doing it? And if you could get unstuck in those areas, then now I can start doing what God put me on the planet to do. So
Wow.
out of that, starting really pre 2011, kind of on the side, and then by 2011 becoming a little bit more formal, and then by 2017, it's like, no, this is what I'm really supposed to be doing. My wife still helps me in the business. She supports me. She doesn't do a lot of the one-on-one coaching, but she's deeply involved in the
Right.
business still. She doesn't like to be in front of the camera or on stage. She wants to be behind the scenes. That's where her gifting lies. And so that's kind of how it all came about, whatever that is now, 11, 12 years that we've been
Yeah, I
doing it.
mean, there's a lot to unpack in that, but I think there's two routes that I want to go. So the first one
Jot them both
is,
down so you don't forget.
yeah,
That's what I
exactly.
do.
The big notes. So the first one is you mentioned that your mom had said you've always been a coach.
Yeah,
And I know you help people come into the purpose, and I do purpose-based work too. And so what I find is that because it's so innate to our being, that people often look over the thing that
right.
they really love. And so I just wanted to, so the listeners can maybe take a lesson from this. Your purpose or your passions are much closer to you than you think. What are your thoughts on that? And what can you share from your own learning lessons?
It's interesting because there's a couple of things. First off, I think you hear a lot of advice like, oh, if you just live your passion, then everything will come together. And there's some truth to that, and it's also not true. And I live in what I call the world of the both and, as opposed to the either or. I think a lot of times we try to set things up in our life and in our world to be, it's either this or it's that. It's black or it's white. It's up or it's down. It's whatever. And I think a lot of times where that tension of the in between, or of the it's both this and it's that, it's not really completely one or completely the other, it's a blending, is where a lot of our real success and our real growth happens, because that's that place of tension. That's that place of confronting your own beliefs and understanding that you're putting limits on yourself, probably, that are artificial. And
Yes.
so that part of that, and that resonates with the passion idea, because yes, your passion should show up in your life. That doesn't necessarily mean it has to be the thing that you do to make money. That's
Yes.
two different decisions. That's two different things. And at the same time, a lot of times it can be the thing, that makes you
Yeah.
money.
I've heard someone else
Yeah,
mention career and calling, and
right.
sometimes there's the and sometimes they're the one. But I love what you shared about that and giving people the permission to have both, because I feel
Yeah,
that when I see people struggle in the area of purpose, it's because they're really like either singularly focused on their work, like career
right.
meaning, not calling, or they're overstating in their calling and they're not making any money. So then it's getting to really like overwhelmed. Suicide is the high end of feeling
Absolutely.
that overwhelmed. So that was kind of my second question, is that's a big place to overcome from and then teach back. So just like, wow, to the work. What do you find when, now that you're helping other people, when other people have either come to you out of a suicidal state or they're in a suicidal state, what do you feel is the piece that's missing from their life? Is it the communication? Is it vulnerability? Like, what did you see in your own experience and working with others in that realm?
The word that I would use to describe it more often than not is alignment.
I
And what
like
I
that.
mean by that is they're not living their life aligned in the direction that they know they should be. And so there's an unhealthy tension or unhealthy pull, that I know I should be going this direction. I know I should be doing these things, but I'm not. I know we should live on less than we make. Everyone knows that. Yeah, it's like, live on less than you make. Brilliant. Thanks so
Okay.
much for that. Wow. Thank you, Captain Obvious. But you know that, but are you actually able to do it? And while doing it, still actually have a life that you want, that feels authentic, that feels connected, that feels like the most important things are being taken care of. The word that, and if I remember right, you and I both like the word harmony as opposed to
Yes.
balance, for the same
Mm-hmm.
reason, which is
Mm-hmm.
balance has that feeling of equality, where harmony has that feeling of, no, there's ebb and there's flow and there's an energy to it that is in alignment with what you're supposed to be doing. And when we get out of alignment, that's when it hurts. That's the dislocated shoulder or the bad back pain, because you're not lined up anymore. You're not fit together in a way that should be. And deep down, it should be. And so the work oftentimes is in that figuring out what is the direction that you should be going, and then what are we doing to move us in that direction? Because it's never instantaneous and it's never perfect. I'm still got things out of alignment today, and I always will. It's just you get more and more in alignment, and then, oh, okay, now I've got to work on smoothing this little rough edge. Oh, look, there's one over here now. I got to work on that one, that kind of thing.
I really like that share because I think that on the extreme side, like again, is suicide, but I bring myself into severe burnout where I wasn't
Mm-hmm.
quite there, but I lost my care to live, which is a little different. It was just like, hey, death might feel better. Not that I wanted to do anything about myself, but I was just like, this life, this living is really hard. This is really, really hard. And so even like in that space, I would say, like, if, anyone's listening to this podcast and you have suffered with suicide thoughts or you're in severe burnout and you just don't care right now, I would really encourage you to take Scott's advice and look into alignment. What's in disharmony? Like sometimes when you're not feeling your best mentally, knowing what works is kind of feels out of reach, but you can definitely start identifying right now what is out of harmony and then maybe play an opposite game.
Well, and a lot of it too, this is where coaching and counseling as well. And I've gone through counseling. I've had counselors at various points in my life for various reasons. And I've had coaches, and again, at various points in my life for various reasons. A lot of times bringing in that outside perspective, it's not that the coach or the counselor or anyone else magically fixes things. It's just twofold to me. One is oftentimes they can bring some tools or some ideas or some suggestions that maybe you haven't thought of. So there's that. They have some knowledge or some skill. The other half too, though, is because they're outside of the situation, they're not deep in the woods. Mm-hmm. They can be kind of that light up on the hill going, hey, there is a way out. It's over here. Come this direction. And this is the path. Let's come this direction. And it's that combination of having somebody that's there for accountability and for highlighting the possibility, and then having somebody that has some knowledge and some skills and some abilities and some tools and some techniques that they can inject. And those two things together, whether it's through coaching, counseling, a combination of both,
sure.
All of the above, whatever it is, that's what can help us a lot of times break through. And honestly, if I could go back 20 years when I was in the deepest part of that, I would have sought more help at that time. But it's hard to do that when you're in the moment, because you feel, whether it's burnout, whether it's suicide, whether it's any trauma, by definition, you start feeling helpless and hopeless. And therefore, it's really hard to reach out for help. And so my encouragement to folks is reach out. If you're in a partnership, talk to your spouse, talk to your partner, have a good friend that you could reach out to, but start having the conversation, because it's not normal. Even though it feels normal in the moment, it's not.
And I want to go into the next question, but I do also want to just say one other thing is that I think it's, like you said, that admitting, and just even to one person, like if you're not in my own healing journey, and I've had overcome burnout was always my thing, and workaholism is my jam. But in my last stint, and hopefully, like you said, I'm not perfect. I can fall into those tendencies really easily, but I do play the harmony, disharmony game with myself a lot. So I typically seem to catch so I can get back into alignment. I love all your words. So in this healing journey, it's been a 20-year evolution for you since you were there. And now you're here helping other people, coaching and being the leader. Your podcast is absolutely wonderful too. But what would you say is the biggest thing you've had to overcome?
We all end up having to overcome the exact same thing. It just plays out in different forms. And what I mean by that is it's ourselves. It's our own limiting beliefs. It's our own voices from the past, hearing echoes of things that my father said when I was growing up. And, oh, well, that's true. And then realize, wait a minute, why do I believe that? Where did that come from? That's not true at all. Why does that feel so true? And yet it's not. Because I once stood in front of a group of about 500 very successful business people. They're all $5-6 million a year businesses, everything. From the outside looking in, everyone would look at them and go, yeah, they're successful. And I said, how many of you have an inner voice that talks to you in some way, shape, or form, either audibly, or you see pictures, or you have that thing in yourself that's talking to you? And every hand goes up. And I'm like, great. Keep your hands up if the voice is nice to you. And every hand went down. And it's like, why is that? Why do we all have that inner demon that sits on our shoulder that says things to ourselves that we would never say to somebody that we cared about?
Yeah.
We would never look at our spouse or our child or our parent and say the things that we'll say to ourselves in our own head. And we'll speak in a way that we would never verbalize. And yet we should be caring for ourselves. We should be able to look at ourselves and say, hey, it's the Smalley on the old, I'm dating myself, the old
Yeah,
Saturday
no, I
Night
love that.
Live,
You
looking
made
at
me
it,
laugh so hard.
I'm handsome and I can't even remember the exact quote. You should be able to do that. And yet that became a joke because that's so not what we do. That's
Right.
what made that funny, is we could all look at that and go, oh yeah, we don't know. I do not do that to myself. And so that sort of inner demon, that sort of inner thought process, that sort of, you can't run your own business. I went from being a highly compensated executive, 6-figure plus kind of business, all of this
Yes, understand.
trappings of everyone would look at me and go, dude, you're quitting that to go run a coaching business? And it's like, yeah, but this is what I need to do. This is what I'm supposed to do. This is fine. And don't get me wrong, we did a lot of stuff to be smart and get ourselves up in a good
Sure.
way. And, we did all of that. It's not like we just quit one day and said, well, it'll all work out. But at the same time, it's because this is more authentic. Now my commute's 30 seconds, not an hour. Now I'm actually at home. I'm not on a plane all the time. All of those things. That is what my wife and I wanted to show up in our life. That's the biggest thing that I think we all fight in some way, shape, or form. It just shows up in different flavors for each of us.
Yeah, I would agree. I think overcoming ourselves is like the challenge of a lifetime.
Absolutely.
And to your point, and as well with my work too, I feel like I overcame myself and I still have work to do, things like that. But I almost feel like it's an obligation to help other people now. I don't know I assume you feel the same way because that's what you do. But it was like, oh my gosh, like that you don't have to suffer. There's ways, like you said, tools and tips from earlier that people just don't have. We're not born with a manual to this life. Unfortunately, I wish we were. It'd make it a lot easier.
If kids came with a manual, that would be wonderful. Anyone who's a parent is at this point going, oh, I wish they did. Because, they don't. And we don't as adults either. You're absolutely right. And again, it's not that, oh, wow, I'm sitting up on the hill and I've discovered all the secrets of the universe and you should come and learn from me at the feet of the master. No, I'm just as screwed up as everybody else and make just as many mistakes and burble through things and everything else, which is why I also have, coaches in my life and people that can speak into my life, because it's like, guess what? I can't coach myself. I need somebody outside of the woods too, that are my woods. And so a lot of times what it is there's things that I know and I can help. I had a prospect call last week and finding out more about what they wanted and how they wanted. And at the end of the call, I went, okay, I'm not the right coach for you, but let me send you some information because I've got 3 coaches that came to mind while we were talking that I think would be a much better fit for you. And you need to go talk to them. And they're like,
awesome.
Why are you telling me this? It just shocked them that I would tell them that. And I'm like, why would I want you to work with me if I'm not the best coach for you? There's 3 other people that are much better at what you need help with than me. Let me introduce you to them.
I love that.
So it's that idea of recognizing, okay, here's where I'm gifted. Here's where I've got some skills and I can help you here. Let me go work with those people. I'll be happier. They'll be happier. We'll all make more progress. It's wonderful. As opposed to, oh, but I should help everybody. I don't try to help everybody. But there are some areas around that, and it's stewardship for me. It's time, talent, and treasures. That's why the podcast is inspired stewardship. The business is inspired stewardship, because it's that idea of let's focus in on those areas. That's the things that for me, I can help people get unstuck and move forward. So that's what I should do.
I love that. So my next question, what is like one of the biggest lessons? Like we've talked about so many lessons on here. So I'm like, I don't know if you have a new one you want to share, but I would like you to share like a recent aha or a lesson that you think would be impactful to the listeners.
I think, and I kind of alluded to it earlier, but I'll come back, and it's the subtext of pretty much everything I've said, if you really think about it, is at the end of the day, we often think the challenge that we have, and I did too, this is where we all do it, it's something from outside. Whether it's the victim thinking of, oh, they're all just against me, they're all holding me back, whether it's that severe, or whether it's even, if I just made more money, my life would be perfect. If I just had 2 kids instead of 1 kid, everything will be all right. If I just had a partner, if I found a spouse, everything would be wonderful. It's outside of us. And it's not that the stuff that's outside isn't important, but it's that the real battle is fought on the inside. It's the heart and the
Hmm.
mind battle that we have to fight and understand first, because no spouse is going to complete you if you're not already an integrated person and your own person. No child is going to finish your life if you're not already healthy yourself. And again, don't misunderstand. Healthy does not mean perfect. This
Love
is
that.
about progress, not perfect. And by the way, all the grammar nerds are going, that should be progress, not perfection. That's the point. It's progress, not perfect, because even that's not perfect, the
I
way of
love that.
saying it. So it's literally that idea of we're all on a journey. I'm on a journey. Maybe there's some places where I can help somebody else along this trip and be the guide. And then there's other places where I need a guide or need somebody to help me. And if we all look at it that way and really begin to help each other, it's a lot easier to have a conversation with somebody, even somebody who's completely the opposite of you, who you completely disagree with, who you're like, I will never see eye to eye with this person. But we can still sit down and have a cup of coffee together and actually have a human conversation and recognize the fact that we're
Absolutely.
both people, and we just happen to not agree on fill in the blank hot button topic issue that you don't agree with people on, because we all have
I really like that answer. And it brought me back to where I lost my
them.
thought earlier, too, is that you have mentioned communication with the spouse a couple times. And when I was in my most helpless, hopeless, powerless moment, I had to come clean with my spouse. And I think that's like where we are going is like you can admit that you're struggling to at least one person. Maybe it's
Yep.
not your spouse, but maybe you have a friend. But in my case, too, I had to just be like, whatever we're doing is not working, like I'm melting. And it was one of the most vulnerable conversations I think I ever had. But then it opened up like we are so close now. There's a deepness in our connection now
Mm-hmm.
because of the vulnerability that I opened up. So I just want to share that for the listeners too. Like what Scott's sharing with you is really our interpersonal struggle and that interpersonal journey. And we don't have to do it alone. And
Absolutely.
I just love everything that you shared. And that kind of brings me into my next question. And we've talked about this. We've already like pseudo answered this, but why are you so passionate about your work?
Because it feels like the thing that I'm called to do. You mentioned earlier the difference between career and calling, and there is a difference. Career actually comes from the root word cart, something to get you from point A to point B, where calling or vocation comes from vocalization, something that is from outside that's telling you. In my worldview, that's spiritual, that's religious,
Yes.
that's God, that's that kind of thing. Whatever name you put on it, it doesn't matter. That's not the point. The point isn't, do you believe in God? The point is, we all have that thing that seems like it comes from outside that says, this fits. This is what you should be doing. And a lot of times we push against that. We spend a lot of time and energy going, oh, yeah, that's not really it. I'm not really supposed to do that. And yet, at the end of the day, when we get in back to alignment with that thing, our life starts to feel better. We stop trying to fix our life by fixing all that outside stuff that I was just talking about,
Yes.
because a lot of times when we have that vulnerable conversation with our spouse, a lot of times it comes across as if you would just, and it's like, no, that's not the
No,
problem.
like me.
It's about us, it's about talking about ourselves. Big difference between you said this and whenever this was said, here's how I felt. This is what I heard. This is what I felt whenever that was said.
I love that
It,
distinction.
the big difference, and it's coming back to that idea, and that's why I love to do it. That's why I've added the components of human behavior and studying that. That's why I've added the coaching. That's why I've added all of these different pieces, is because at the end of the day, that's where my passion lies, and being able to see people understand first themselves
Hmm.
so that we can then understand others, so that we can communicate better, get along better, be on the same page. When that happens, whenever I'm working with a couple and all of a sudden they're like, for the first time we talked about money and we didn't fight. It's like,
Yes.
yes,
Yes.
touchdown. That's a win. It's
That's
like,
so
those are
awesome.
the moments that I'm like, yeah, score. This was a win. And getting to have even one or two of those in a period of time is so much better than all the other stuff that I could be doing. And so that's why I'm passionate about it, is because
I
it's
love
those
it.
moments.
And this is a really good segue to ask like, if someone embraces this fact of living an aligned life, how would it empower their life even more?
I think a lot of it is, so a lot of times we live our life with the future state. And what I mean by that is, when this happens, I'll be happy. Or when I get to this point in my career, then I'll be able to start spending some more time with my kids or my wife
Mm-hmm.
or whatever. When I get to this place, it's always that thing in the future, that line in the sand that's just out there just a little bit further. When I get the new car, then I'll feel more complete. When I get the new job, then I'll feel more complete. When I make this amount of money, then I'll feel more complete. Whatever it is, however that shows up for you. And when you begin to get in alignment, all of a sudden, it's not that those goals don't still exist, and it's not that you can't have goals, and it's not that you aren't driven, and it's not that you aren't going forward, but those are no longer the thing that you're chasing. They just become goals that you have. The thing you're chasing is that internal state of why, of this is what my emotional drivers is. This is what feels like it's authentic to who I am and who I should be. And by living authentically, that shows up, and the other stuff all of a sudden becomes easier. What's weird is the goals become easier for two reasons. One is you'll end up getting rid of some of them, because some of them you'll discover like, oh,
It's true.
why was I chasing that? And it's not that you got rid of it because you couldn't achieve it. It's just, you're like, oh, I really don't care about that after all. Turns out that wasn't important. I just thought it was because everyone told me it was. And so I was after that. And then the other is you'll begin to live in the moment of today. At the end of the day, we can only live in the present. Plan for the future. You learn from the past, but you live in the present. It's this moment in time. This is the only moment you can affect. And so once you begin to do that, again, it's not that you don't have plans, and it's not that you don't have goals, and it's not that you're not driven, because everyone always thinks that, oh, if you live in that moment, that somehow you're complacent. And there's a really big difference between being content and being complacent. By being authentic, you can be content. Things are good, you're happy. Things are bad, you're still happy. It's like, I'd like this to be better, but it's not going to kill
It's
me.
not gonna,
It's,
yeah,
it's not
exactly.
the end
It's
of the
not gonna,
world.
bring you all the way out.
So that's what authenticity and alignment really lets you do. It lets you live in that place where I have much and I'm content. I have little and I'm content,
I
because
love
it's
that
not
so
about the
much.
stuff. It's not about the goals. It's not about
It's
the
about how you
big,
feel and
yeah,
how
it's how you
the
feel.
quality of your life.
Hmm.
Oh, that's so awesome. I am so happy. This half an hour went by so fast. I'm like actually sad. I'm like, interview needs to end. But Scott, I would love the audience to be able to stay in contact with you. So could you share how the audience can find you and connect with you on social?
Absolutely. So I actually set up a landing page just for your listeners. So if they
Thank
go
you.
to inspiredstewardship.com/empowered, it'll take them to that page. There's a place there that you can learn more about me. There's even a place where you can set up a half hour if something that I said resonated with you, and
Be
you're
wonderful.
resonated. I'll speak
Yeah.
English. I promise I'll speak English in a moment. If it clicked and you're like, oh, I want to talk to him some more, by all means, take advantage of that. There's no charge, no pressure. You just heard me talk about, I'm getting to the end of the call and be like, oh, go talk to this coach because they're better. That's how I do things. And
I love it.
but there's also a way they can get in touch with me and have just follow up and find more information about me, my socials, and all of that sort of stuff over there.
Perfect. Perfect. Well, Scott, thank you so much for coming on the Empowered Half Hour and sharing all that wisdom. I can't wait to share this with everybody. It's going to be great.
Awesome. I was glad to be here.